Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our 46th live kitchen table conversation with the Men and Masculine Folks Network, where we are shaping a new meaning of masculinity that is authentic, caring, and thoughtful. I am Felix Martinez, and my pronouns are he, him, and his, or él in Spanish. And we're super excited to get into this conversation with our very special guest, Jeanne Li. Jeannie is a healthy masculinity coach, and we're excited to learn more about her work. But before we dive in, let's have everyone to introduce themselves. So again, my name is Felix Martinez. My pronouns are he, him, and his, and él, and I work for Esperanza United as a engaging men and boys program specialist. Super excited to be here.
Hello, my name is Serrano Robinson. I use he, him, his pronouns. I am logging in out of Duluth, and I work with young youth at Menace Peacemakers, teaching and I say learning as well, healthy masculinity and having good conversations. So, thank you for having me.
Hi, I'm Janie. I use there, them pronouns. As Felix mentioned, I'm a holistic life coach who works on, quote, like detoxing toxic masculinity through modalities like shadow work, emotional freedom technique, internal family systems. I also do community organizing around Cleveland surrounding racial justice and housing justice. And I'm really excited to be here today.
Thank you to you for being here. As a father of two daughters, I'm super excited of this conversation, and let's dive in. Jeannie, can you please tell us a little bit about your story and how you got involved in working in this role of masculinity or in masculinity?
Sure. It comes a lot from like life experience. I feel like throughout my 20s, I dated a lot of what I call like sad boys, who are just have this these different types of I tend to operate in more like social justice circles, but I noticed even among the men in those circles there was a lot of like toxic behaviors, using women and femme folk for a lot of emotional labor, um, being like accidentally manipulative in some ways, or like gaslighting. And I actually have a friend right now, close friend, who's like going through an accountability process for like previous abusive behaviors, like gender-based abusive behaviors. So I'm really looking to find men and masculine folks who are like realizing that they need to change and are looking for the resources and like guidance to try and get to a healthier masculine place. So I really believe in the power of like transformative justice, trauma informed care. I think not to like excuse bad behavior, but I think a lot of toxic masculine traits come down to like a lot of repressed, what I call like small t traumas, like that have accumulated over their life and men have not been allowed to express it in a healthy way. And I just try and work through a lot of those like inner demons that men are struggling with, and get them to a place where they can express their emotions in with through healthy behaviors.
Well, that's a lot, and that's a lot. And coming from a female identified, teaching masculinity to other men, what are some of those challenges that you have been able to get into, especially coaching men on a topic as masculinity?
Yeah, some people have asked me like, is it fair for like a femme person to be coaching masculinity, and like, should this come from another man or masculine
Hmm.
folk? Um, but I've found that there are some men who are actually like more comfortable speaking to like a femme like person, because it is like I feel like I almost operate more like a therapist in a lot of ways. So I provide a kind of sense of um, I don't know, like comfort in like a just like non-judgmental kind of way. But yeah, some of the struggles are like, I feel like men sometimes, unless they are reaching that vulnerability point, often don't feel ready to like talk about these feelings that they have that may they realize are problematic or realize are toxic. And it's it I need to like sort of sometimes coax people to start talking about and admitting to a lot of these thought patterns they have, or like paradigms that they have of the world about, you know, women as conquests, or like how do we properly respect women's boundaries and capacities. So I think it's a good way to actually like practice for them as well. Like being, if someone is seeking coaching in it, then they've already realized like I can't have like my girlfriend or partner do all the work for me, you know. So it's a way for them to like realize like I need to respect my partner's capacity. They are not, my girlfriend is not, or my spouse wife is not my therapist. So I think it provides a way for them to like open up in a calm, comfortable situation. Because I use like trauma informed care, I'm like, and I'm super non judgmental. I work with clients who have, you know, done bad things in their past. And I just want to make sure that they feel like they can say whatever they need to say and we can work through that.
I love how you said that your partner or your wife or your girlfriend is not like your therapist. I feel like a lot of men in general kind of struggle with that thought. They kind of go into this like it's us versus the world, right? Like we can't talk to other people, I can't talk to other people. But then you're actually just caging the person you say you love into like being your therapist, into, and we all know best, like nobody close to you can really be your therapist. Like it's like the weirdest thing where it's like that's why conflict of interest exists, is because you're not gonna like, the moment she says anything that's not what you like or not what you want to hear, you know, you're going to use your dominance to bend and fold and to make it seem like it's in your cards. So um, I just love that you said that, because I've seen that so many times where it's like, no, we don't talk about what goes on outside of this. And it's like, yeah, you do. You have to. Like, you're a singular person who's probably gone through things that your partner has nothing to do with, right? Like, you probably are like having her deal with things that you weren't, like, she probably wasn't even around when you were dealing with these things. And that's how I look at it too. It's like people shouldn't be hurt, especially if they weren't like if they weren't around. You know, if you're dealing with not speaking about, you know, maybe the things that you dealt with as a child, like nobody really deserves to be around that negativity. I think honestly, it's on the person to actually realize, like you said, realize, and to dive in to do that own like personal work. So I just appreciate you like starting it off by saying that, yeah, like your partner's not your therapist, because it's easily how they can be caged into being a therapist, and now it's a lot more heavier for the partner than it is for the person.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I really believe in the idea of like community care, you know, like we don't grow just as individuals in this vacuum. Which is why like especially men who are trying to reckon with things they've done in the past, like have to go through like a community accountability process. Just because we like, it's the whole like idea like it takes a village to like raise a child, right? And I feel like that's something our society is missing a lot, is this ability to share with someone outside of your like, you know, relationship, um, and make sure that everyone's on the same page. We're all growing and learning together as individuals and as like a community, and we can like uplift each other without like putting other people down, and just being non-judgmental, especially when people want to change. And I think that's the important part. Like if someone's realizing like, oh hey, like my girlfriend or partner seems to be like, you know, pretty tired recently, or like not wanting to engage in conversation. I wonder why that is. And like, I can help them talk through like, well, have you been, you know, do you see a therapist? Do you have a lot of issues that you talk to with her with? And is it, and then sometimes like people like have a light bulb moment of being like, oh, like I need to seek outside help for these kinds of things. Yeah.
Absolutely, that's so true. You know, so listen to both of you. I can agree more. It's difficult, you know, to create those boundaries and to put that pressure in your partner. And I see it personally in my life, and sometimes even bringing friends to be that person. And a quick example I can give you is I remember going through a really difficult time with a partner that I had, and one of our friends in common came to try to listen to both. And after that person listened to me, and obviously I was venting, I was young, obviously immature, but her response was, Felix, I've been talking to you for 10 minutes and you'll be only saying bad things about this person, and right away I feel like I was judged. Instead of that person listened to me, he was just judging me right away. And it was so difficult and totally close at that moment. It just totally closed that connection with that person and trust with that person. So after saying this, my a question to follow up is, what is a healthy masculinity coach, and how does that work? If you in your case, you as a coach, being in that situation, probably similar to the ones that I have, that you listen to someone going through a hard time that you're trying to coach him. How that work? How does it work, and what's a healthy masculinity coach?
Sure. Yeah. So I use a couple modalities. A lot of it is based in the concept of like shadow work and internal family systems. Shadow work is like a Jungian concept that like we each have like this shadow. It's almost like, the moon has like a light side and a dark side, and the dark side is one that is always with you, and it's not like always like evil or bad. But it's just like the sort of the stuff that doesn't, the like what you want to call like maybe inner demons that lie in the back of your brain. So a lot of shadow work like has I have my clients like reflect on like, why do you think like your self-worth is tied into, how many women you've been with, or like why is your self-worth tied into like how athletic you feel or stuff like that. Just delving into I think like root causes, and a lot of it like I separate like trauma into like I call it like big T trauma and little T trauma. Big T traumas are the ones you think of where you might get PTSD from, like assaults or like injuries, war. But small T traumas are like if you were a young boy who got made fun of a lot in high school for being too scrawny or like short, or and you were never allowed to process those feelings. Um, I'll give men and masculine folks a space for them to open up and like talk about how much that's affected them, because when it's like stuffed in year after year after year, it's gonna come out, and when it's not processed properly, it's gonna come out in these like insidious toxic ways that you often don't even realize what's going on. So shadow work allows for a way to tap into that, like that other side of you that is always within you but just needs to be like addressed. And like internal family systems is this idea of you have like a true inner self, but then you also have like different parts of you, that like it's almost as if like it's the idea that like you have like the devil on your shoulder, or like in the angel on one shoulder, or different parts of you. Like so there's like the hyper masculine macho dude in one corner telling you like, no, you should go hit on that girl, and then like another part of you being like, I'm trying to be more respectful. So like working through how these parts of you can become a cohesive person instead of just like battling each other, and then not creating a conducive environment for growth. So through the like parts work, that's another way of like framing or saying the internal family systems, you can work through and become like your truest self. Like you take those, you don't judge the parts, you don't judge like that part of you that's saying like you should go hit on more women or whatever. You address them and talk to them and like give every part of you a piece of compassion to be able to work through why these things are happening. um, and then I also use techniques like emotional freedom technique, which has been, in internal family systems evolving. Like there's the book, The Body Keeps a Score by Vanderkolk. I don't know if any of you have read it, but it's like considered one of the foremost um, books on trauma and how to do trauma care. And so much of it's like physiological and not solved like just through like stream of consciousness, psychotherapy kind of ways. And emotional freedom technique works along like meridian lines in terms of like reprocessing your thought patterns. So that's another modality I use. But really, like it comes down to is like I feel like I'm sure a lot of people have heard this, but like patriarchy hurts men too, right? And so in turn, I feel like a lot of women and femme folks like internalize or are the recipients of that violence, and then men take all those like small t traumas and externalize them in like often dangerous or like violent ways, and just working through all of those different parts of you and shifting the paradigms in your mind, trying to get you to a place where you can be like not like self-actualized, but at least like in a way self-aware and like reckoning with what masculinity means to you.
Absolutely. Um, and I have a quick question. Normally, when I work with youth and even some males, sometimes there's not a male identified person in the life of the child, and they're mostly females. So, how you could encourage women to have these type of conversations with young boys? Because I see them all the time. That, you know what, I don't have a dad is not present in the house. I have this 13-year-old youth that, I don't know how to teach them how to become a better man or how to be a better, version of themselves. What will be a suggestion for maybe those families where maybe there's not a male identified person?
um I think it's like important to be able to like I think role models are really important, and even if you don't have like a physical tangible role model in your life, that's where a lot of literature and media can come into play, which is why it's so important for us to have like healthy representations of men in the media, so that we're not like all men are just trying to be these like macho superheroes, destroying everything in their path. And so I think turning to like, sci-fi with like healthy male role models, or like fantasy, any type of like fiction. I know I've recently gotten to some, as I've like come into more of like my queer identity, reading a lot of like even like queer male poets, like just sort of working through that. Obviously, it would be a male role model. It makes things, who has a healthy masculinity, makes things easier to be able to see that. But I think deconstructing it on your own can be a way, if you can turn to like a more imaginative self, which I feel like a lot of young people have. Like they're a lot more imaginative, creative than we give them credit for. So being able to see different parts of what kind of man they want to grow up to be is something that you can find in different places as well.
Yeah, I believe that fully. I think like working with like just kids in general. I think there was a question a while back where it was like there's like games and movies, does it have like an effect, and we kind of struggled with it for a long time. Like no, yes, but like working with youth, like you see that is very it is actually true, and heavily true, especially nowadays with a 3-year-old being able to have a phone. I see a 4-year-old with a tablet, and I'm like, I didn't have a phone since I was 16. So you could tell that the rate of which people are being exposed to these things are very, very soon, and they're very, very younger. And you can tell, like you'll watch like a young kid, and specifically a young boy, and a lot of it will come from obviously the parents and at home as well, but a great percentage of it comes from the media. It comes from how like we portray women in the media, how men are portrayed, how the relationship between men and women are portrayed in the media. Because I'll like talk, just regular conversation with them, and you just hear certain things, And I'm where did you get that from? And they're like, easily can name a show or a specific media. So I think you're absolutely right. And like, we got to be better at like even promoting like more positive um, outlets for young folks. Because I would say, yeah, like the ratio of like what's out there that's healthy and what's not is very, very like leaning on the unhealthy side of what they see as well. So
Yeah, and that's one thing I since in doing a lot of racial justice work, well, like there's all these guides for white folks to be like how to like literally like Ibram X. Kendi has a book like how to be an anti-racist, and there's one like geared for children that he also wrote, and there's a lot of books about like how to be a better ally as a white person to people of color, and I am hoping for the day that we are able to write books about like I don't like this like narrative. I understand the like it's fun to joke about the like men are trash kind of thing every now and then, but I feel like in general it's not a good narrative to just like throw half the gender under the bus, not under the bus, that's better putting it, but like just dismiss that as like a hopeless cause. And I hope to see in the future like on the New York Times top seller books like how to be a better man, like how to be a better ally to women, femme folks, non-binary folks, like how you work on these things? Because when I part of why I started doing this was because I had like male friends who were like, I don't know where to start. There's resources, but they're like hard to find. Like I remember I struggled just looking up like healthy masculinity doesn't even like there were like your org pops up and like stuff like that, but there's not a lot of just very straightforward, easy to find, easy to access, like how to be a better masculine person in this world and navigate it. And I hope we can start doing a little bit more like calling in, which like shouldn't be on like it should the labor shouldn't primarily be like on men if it's like unpaid, but I think I'm hoping to with like the more of the content I create, maybe down the line, like writing some type of book that can be easily accessed by men and allow them to start processing without necessarily have to go through the coaching process as well.
Absolutely, and I think that's one of the reasons, obviously why you're here at this moment, just because we need. There's a lack of role models, a lack of individuals out there open the space to have this type of conversation about masculinity, and it's one of the reasons probably why I do this job too. Not only because I have two daughters, but also as a man, I understand that I have caused harm. Not in purpose, but some of my behaviors, the way I talk sometimes, so how I can raise my voice, the ways that I was teach, and it's hard when we listen to Serrano and what he said about media and what you also said, Jeannie. What the youth are absorbing from the TV, from the movies, all those role models, they're not necessarily the best ones. And when you listen to the music that my daughters listen sometimes, I'm just like, oh my God, have you heard what that person said? And had that opportunity to have that conversation and say, you know what, that's harm right there. You're causing harm. I think that's, what that people are singing is probably not the best, way to bring a topic or to bring something to the world. And it's very challenging as a father, as an uncle, as a mentor, and as a coach. I know there's so many challenges, but us putting that seed and starting to open the space is it create change, it create opportunities to other young folks to have these type of conversations, because they're not easy to have. And when we think how deep that is in our society, it's hard. It's not something that you go through a session of healthy masculinity and you, okay, I'm a new man, life is gonna change now, because in the reality take time. I've been doing this job for 5 years and I still learning, I still learning so much. about this, and I continue making mistakes, but opening that space. And like Jeannie, you said, maybe a place that is accessible, because a lot of the workshops that I've been into when I was starting this field, they were facilitated by professionals, and me seeing myself as someone from the community, I couldn't connect with a lot of the things that they talk about, just because it wasn't culturally specific. And it was hard for me, because I didn't know what to say. And it was tough, and it's still tough because I still learning. So I encourage men in the community, people that are listening, to men and masculine folks that are listening to these conversations, just to understand that this take time. This is not something that's happened to one day to another, but by connecting with good role models, with good people, with good intentions, that are vulnerable and they're willing to learn on their own pace, is very powerful. So.
Yeah, I think with personal transformation, if if anyone ever tells you like you're done growing, you're done improving as a person, then that person it doesn't know what they're talking about, because you the day you decide, like, it's also very trite, like you when you decide to stop growing as a person, like that's the day you like die inside, kind of a little bit, like you have given up on trying to be better. um and I just think it's important, like, yeah, Felix, you were saying, like, you're constantly learning, like, I even me, like, I learn every day how to be a better ally to like Black and Indigenous people. I learn how to be a better ally to like trans folks. Like, it's just one of those. And even as a non-masculine person, everyone has like toxic behaviors that they have to work on. And I think it takes a lot of emotional maturity to look back and say, like, oh, I messed up, and now I'm a better person, and I'm gonna be an even better person in the future.
It's like weird. It's not weird, but it's funny that you said like the part about learning, because once you start talking about like learning new things, I'm like, I literally feel alive learning new shit. Like that's just literally the word I associate with learning new things is like I really feel more alive. I feel more like a kid, and I feel more in a good way. And then literally, like if I'm not learning or if I'm choosing not to learn, I feel like more enclosed. Like literally, like you're just cutting off the process of learning. And I see so many men specifically as they get older, and that's like the hard part, right? It's like they get older, and then they base age on learning, and those two things have nothing really in common. Obviously, we all go through school, so we all go through school during a certain age. But just because we leave school or the depths of school, college, whatever that may be, it doesn't mean we stop learning. But that's one thing that I've seen heavily with older men is like whether it's ageism plays a part in there, right? Like you can't tell them shit because you're younger, and it's you're the new generation who's doing all this shit and all that, or they just feel like they're too old to learn, and it's like no, that doesn't make any sense. Like you could be any age to open a new book, even like hobbies, like new tasks, new things that make you happy, new things that help you with your mental health. I think that even correlates with mental health. Like as we get older, we're just like, well, I'm me, fuck it, like I'm. It's like plop on the couch, like fuck it, this is it, like, and it's like no, it's really not that. I think when you go into the depths of having that conversation with yourself, when you're actually realizing and you're reacting to yourself, like you'll notice, like, oh no, I can actually change. It's actually up to me, um, and I can definitely do that. I can learn. I can. There's nothing wrong with learning as well. There's literally nothing wrong with it. You're not dumb. Honestly, I really do associate like smart with like wanting to learn. It's weird. Like if anybody would ask me today, like, what do you call like what's the definition of smart? I would say the definition of smart is being willing to learn. Like it don't mean you know everything. It means you're open to receiving things that you may not know about. So I love that, like you said that, because I'm not gonna lie, yeah. When I think about learning new shit, I'd be like super excited. So thank you for that.
Of course. Yeah, I think that combination of like wanting to learn all the time is, and that keeping you alive is like a perfect example. And I also think, like, on the flip side of that, when, Felix, you mentioned a lot of these kids watching media that, you're like, what's going on, is just giving people the ability to be like critical of their like what they're consuming, having that critical thought and analysis. Like, because like everyone has their guilty pleasures. They listen to some song and you're like, okay, that was not great, but like being aware of like what's going on. If someone is endorsing it, you could be like, hey, like let's talk about this, like this lyric right here, like why did that resonate with you? Did you like, or do you think maybe there's something to think a little bit deeper over here? And I think giving people those skills allow them, like sets them up for like a lifelong learning journey. Just to be able to like to not be just like sated or satisfied with what's going on now, and like you were saying that like it's like, well, I'm done, I give up now, but like realizing that that process is never done and you always have a chance to learn. Like my dad, he's been struggling with this idea of retirement. He's finally sort of been forced to retire due to like ageism and just like people don't hire like 65-year-olds. But also like his whole identity was wrapped up in being like a breadwinner and like, you know, the patriarch of the family, and he like doesn't know what to do with himself. And it's just one of those like, this is, I see it as like a prime opportunity for you to be like, okay, this is a way you can expand your identity and who you are, that's not just in a externalized way. Someone, you can find out who you are intrinsically. And I think that's a lot of where you know, some toxic traits come from too, is just like this lack of like self-worth or knowing who you are. And then so you like act out because you don't have anything to anchor yourself or ground yourself, because you don't truly know who you are as a person, because you have these like, you view like, this is what a man is, so this is who I have to be, but you don't know who you actually are outside of those like paradigms.
Yeah, I think living in a world that it's open, that you're not limited to, what those expectations are in the society, it just opened the door to a huge world where we can explore and feel young, because you're learning all the time. And by listening to Serrano, I just, the first thing that came to my mind was listen to my parents saying, you cannot teach old horse new tricks, or something like that. One of those sayings, that it's like, at the same time that you learn positive things in your community, you also learn certain things that try to force you to be in certain ways. So in the same way as masculinity, we learn that masculine folks need to be this way, when eventually we have learned that that this is cause harm not only to us, but the people around us. So it's so important, to have that understanding, and like you say, Jeannie, uh to be open, to be open to learn, and maybe have those deeper conversation when those opportunity comes. So thank you for saying that. So moving on, another question that I have is for Jeannie, is what you think is important for men and masculine for to practice, a healthier version of masculinity, because we've been listening a lot of, how community, how the society expect from us, on how we flow through the, through our lives in the society. So why it's important, to practice a healthy version of ourselves? What's the impact not only in us but in our communities?
I think one really important aspect is to have other friends who you can be really vulnerable with, who are also, you know, men or masculine folk. Like I mentioned a little bit earlier about like using your girlfriend as a therapist, like instead of just, you know, using the emotional labor of women, you need to be vulnerable. You need to be able to be vulnerable around other men in order to start. Not only does it like help you start transforming, but it also plants the seeds in other men, masculine folk, about like, oh, like I see, you know, so and so starting to and like show deep emotions. Like maybe it's okay for me to do that too. And like that's how you sort of spread that community care. So I think for a lot of men, it's kind of hard to find those people in their lives, especially if they've grown up surrounded by this like really repressed macho culture, and that's what their, you know, their high school football friends or whatever. So I think it's important for men to be able to find those folks in their lives, like the male identifying folks that allow you to like really be authentic in how you're feeling and not have to do like bro vibes only, good vibes only, you know, like we don't need that like toxic positivity. We want to have real conversations, not just tailgating, talking about sports, talking about your feelings and your thoughts, and you know, even calling out your fellow male you know, friends for being like, hey, that was a problematic thing you did right there, and then having a deep and honest conversation about it. um, so, yeah, that's, I think that's the number one recommendation I would give.
So for me as a man, how I maintain a better, or maintain, or I better myself as a man? What will be your suggestion for that? How can I maintain it, especially when we consider that all this negative information we're receiving it, you know, from the TV, from the music, from even our own friends, you know, how we can maintain that when, even when we want to become a better version of ourselves, we still get bombarded with all these unhealthy, you know, behaviors. And ask you that question as a coach. So what, you know, what will you say to someone, you know, who's trying to become a better version of themselves?
I think just to try and instill in yourself that it's like a moral responsibility to act
Mhm.
in a healthy way, and really when that becomes ingrained in you and you feel it's like a moral obligation, moral responsibility, you have to live by those ideals. And I've worked with also people with like, and have had partners with like addiction issues. And like one of the first things you do is like you go over like, what are your values in life? So once you like solidify like being a healthy man as one of your values, you have to sort of live by that code of ethics, which, you know, obviously like sometimes will be breached or like will ebb and flow here and there. But every time you ground yourself, you want to like ground yourself in your healthiest version. So I think that's the way. And then like keeping that like critical lens on everything in the back of your mind. So like cultivating this like sense of learning and like value based life, um, is is a way that you can sort of like buffer yourself with, from the bombardment of like toxic consumption that we get. And then another thing that I think can really help with it is just surrounding yourself with good people. Like I think I've learned as I'm in like entering my mid 30s now is like when you have toxic people who aren't willing to change, like sometimes you just got to cut those people out of your life. Like if they are having a negative impact on your mental health, making you act a certain way that you don't think is right, um, if they're willing to change, like this can be a journey you can go on together, which can be great. But if they're just like they've just given up, they're like, this is just the way I am, like you might need to find better folks in your life and like surround yourself with a diversity of gender, a diversity of race. Like it's you don't want to live in that bubble of like I'm only around these like hyper masculine men all the time. Like it's you're gonna get trapped in that bubble, you know. But if you are around other people like women, non-binary folks, like you have a like, unless you're actively causing harm, in which case you should, you know, work on yourself first. But if you are you have that lens and you have that value-based system, keeping other people around can really check yourself a lot of times. Because I feel like a lot of times men will like say stuff that they realize later, they'll be like, oh, I would never say that in front of a woman. Why did I say that to a dude? And just like checking yourself in those kinds of ways.
So like again, it's just like I think I'm just like loving the accuracy that you come with. Because yeah, I think it's absolutely right. Like it'll literally be like when the person's not in the room. It's like some fake tough type macho shit when it's like, isn't the person shouldn't be in the room if we have something to say about them or to them. And then I love the fact that you talk about having willing and unwilling friends. I think that is like a good conversation, like for folks who have an understanding of what a little bit of healthy masculinity looks like. Because sometimes it's hard, like when you're like, but I love like the both, because it's okay to be like, this person is just not willing to fucking change right now, and I don't have to be around that. I just simply don't. I'm also a fan of like knowing that sometimes cutting somebody off is also an inherent message for them. Because that if they really love you, like they're really gonna have to sit down and be like, damn, why don't I see him anymore? What actually went wrong? And I think in the midst of communication, like they'll know, right? Because if you're healthy within yourself, you obviously you're vocal with them, like, hey, these things that you're doing is not like that's not how I rock. That's not cool. It's not okay. We got to have better conversations. So I think even the cutoff part is healthy, because like it's healthy for yourself, obviously, first of all. But then they get to actually come back and be like, well, damn, what, you know what I mean? Where did that drop off on? Where did it drop off on? And if I care about this person, if I care about the future of this life, like how can I change? Um, and then I love the willing friends. Like I have a friend now, like it like makes my heart smile, if that makes sense. Like when he like he'll do shit that I like he never really did before, like crying in front of me and expressing like love for certain people, telling me that he loves me, like there's certain shit, and then I'm like how you have a moment where you're like, this shit is work, like it's like this is life. So sometimes we struggle with shit, and like I have these moments where I go back to being a kid, and I'm like, that really like it worked. Like it wasn't easy, don't get me wrong, but that it is real. Being open, modeling these things, it really does work. Because I've had them both. I won't lie. I've had modeling to the unwilling, and then you end up having a conversation with yourself. Like, is it the modeling, or is it the person? And it's like, no, it's not the modeling. You never want to stop modeling good behavior. Never want to do that. Like that don't even make sense. It's always going to be the relationship that you have with the person. And then the willing, obviously, the modeling just kind of helps. It takes time. But I literally saw a friend of mine, like, he kind of grew up in that, like, small kind of town. Everybody knew what they knew. Everybody was on the same vibe. You couldn't change. But then we just had, like, deep, like, conversations that other friends would have, like, broke off and be like, you know what, fuck you, like, all these things. And I apologize for the language. But yeah, like if we just had deep conversations, like kind of roaring heart conversations, and I watched them, I'm like, oh, he's like a lot more emotionally aware here. He's a lot more emotionally vocal here. So I love that you talked about the split aspect of having a willing friend or a willing person in your life and having somebody that's unwilling, and how do you respond to both of those? I appreciate that.
Thank you.
I see that in my Facebook. In this last 5 years, I've been doing this work in communications in WhatsApp. Groups that used to be very active, and once I start having this type of conversation, you can start seeing how they start being more quiet and quiet. Some conversations that now they don't even talk, because what they used to do in the past, it was just sexist jokes where they objectify women, or homophobic stuff. And now when I step up, say, you know what, uh, I don't think that's cool. You could tell that it's just like from uh, a chat that we used to talk, during the whole day. Now maybe we have a conversation once a week, but that tells you a lot too, because they're aware of what they're doing. It can cause harm, but at the same time, like you mentioned, Serrano, I have seen in my close circles how some of my loved ones have been able to be now first responders, and people that in the past they used to be quiet, and now they used to say, you know what, I don't agree what this person is saying. And a lot of the times have caught me off guard, but it made me realize, like it happened to you, Serrano, like, you know what, these type of conversations are working. I think men are starting to make better decisions because we're having this type of conversations. That's what we want. Sometimes we send our kids to schools expecting to say, you know what, they're gonna learn what they need to learn at school. No, things start at home. Or values, the conversations, the openness to our loved ones, so they can feel comfortable. So in a certain moment of life they need support or help, they're not gonna go to those people out there that they're not maybe have their best intentions. If not, that they come to you, where you can hopefully, providing that strength and support that that person need, so they're successful, they make better decision, and they don't make the same mistakes that we make when we're growing up. So, but at the same time, I need to admit that there's a lack of good role models out there. So yeah, so it's very powerful to have this type of conversations. So let's see. So Jeannie, how you define success when you're doing this work?
I think this alludes back to what um, both of you were kind of saying, is this idea that success means you like realize that you're on a lifelong journey of learning. And it's like not like you have successes along the way. Like your life is a series of quote successes or failures or mistakes or achievements. And I think success is just realizing that you are a constantly growing person and like having those values instilled in you and making sure you live by those values and taking accountability for actions that you may have messed up on and holding other people accountable for their behavior. I think it's a lot of living authentically, which, is difficult when, men feel the need to hide their emotions a lot. So I think, having those close friends, as we'd all mentioned before, where you can be vulnerable around. Yeah, so I think it's a strong, this like individual ethical living, and also with a strong community to like back you up. um, I think that's where you are, filling your own cup first, obviously, then using that to help spread seeds of growth in other people, and just allowing everything to bloom and constantly bloom, and I would consider that success.
Yeah, it's super inspiring to listen to you and to get obviously sometimes a different perspective, even that they're similar in certain ways. But I have two daughters, so I would love to hear from you. I would love my daughters to continue doing this type of work too. So, what will be your suggestions for them? For maybe male identified folks that want to do this work, but just because they're females, they think they or identify as females, they don't think they can do this work or have this type of conversation. How you can do that? How you can inspire them or provide that guide in order to get to do what you're doing right now.
I think it like depends on like I think it's good as, yeah, for like women to be like good role models in like their own ways, like making sure that they aren't reinforcing any sort of like toxic masculinity, because it kind of goes both ways. Like sometimes there's a lot of um, I think some women have accidentally bought into a lot of patriarchal notions of like what a man should be, and it's like unfortunate. I don't like blame women for this, but they often like reinforce each other in like kind of a vicious cycle. So I think that's like one thing to make sure to check yourself on, is like, some evaluate like, why don't I want to date a guy who's younger or like shorter than I am? Like, what does that say? Like, just think about those kinds of things. Um, so that you can actually like live the values that you say you ascribe to. And then also, I think just like not giving out like tons and tons of like free emotional labor is really important. Like the whole like you're not guy's therapist, you're not your partner's therapist. Um, but I think it's important to encourage your male friends to be like, hey, that friend over there, like he seems like, he's really in touch with his emotions. Maybe you want to hang out with him a little bit more, but also like not do all the work for them. Because I remember when I first started, like, I was like trying to buy books left and right for like friends and like trying to like fix everybody. And I think even as a coach, like I'm still not like fixing people, and people are not like problems to be fixed. Like I think just approaching this as like a learning and growing opportunity, but also making sure to like respect your own boundaries and capacity. Like it's not on women to like solve this problem, but women can definitely help the men along the journey. And if they want to get into more like, paid like coaching kind of work, I think it's good to find that community of men who are ready to start growing, and like you can start with your internal networks in terms of like, hey, I've seen that guy, he started posting Facebook posts that are like starting to check his like behaviors, like he's starting to realize something's wrong with his life, and be like, hey, do you want to talk about this? I offer these services, like we could work together on some of these behaviors that you're realizing are not so great. um, so just a lot of like making sure you're not overextending yourself, making sure that you're checking yourself in ways that aren't reinforcing toxic masculinity, and also there's a career component of it that you're trying to, it ends up being a lot of like networking, and which is good and bad, but that's, I think, covers some of the major bases.
Do you work with younger kids as well, or is it just like adult men?
So far my clients have all been adults, so I have not worked with like youth or teenagers. I would definitely be interested in that, because that's like super formative years. Like it's one of those like you could stop it in its tracks before it mushrooms into something a lot worse. But yeah, usually I think sometimes I joke about how like men mature like 5 years after a lot of women do. Like um, there's that like kind of I think a little bit of a lag and delay, because the way patriarchy has set up the how we process things. But I think it's as men get older, especially like mid 30s, is I tend to get the men that are my clients is like when they're starting to realize like, oh, like something's wrong with my life. Why aren't things clicking? Like, yeah, like why did my last two girlfriends leave me and call me, say I was gaslighting? Like, what does that mean? Like, that tends to be the turning point for a lot of men. So, but I would love to work with, youth and teens. That would be really exciting for me.
And that's super dope. Like it's like a double time you're doing. Like you're helping them address and repair the harm as well. And you're absolutely right. With young kids, it's a lot easier. That might be one of the reasons why I work with young kids. I'm not gonna lie at all. It's that it's a lot easier, as well. And I have this specific story, if y'all cool with it. It was like literally my first like year at Menace Peacemakers, the first like weeks and within the schools. So the first couple weeks or the first weeks when we're in the schools, we kind of like to generally set like a foundation of how we're going to be, or rules if you use that word. So we kind of ask the youth like, okay, what are we going to do in this group? How are we going to be? How are we going to feel? How are we going to see? Um, so at this point, we're just going around in a circle, and kids are left and right saying different different rules. And at this time, it's an all boy group. So there's nothing but boys in there, including myself. So we're all just going our rules. No hitting, no this. And randomly, this young boy, he was like, if we're in this group, like we can't cry. So he probably heard like boys group. He probably thought it was some like macho type, don't do it, don't cry in here type shit. I understand where he got that from. And physically, like I do work out, I play basketball, I have like tattoos. So sometimes that doesn't help, like in a way of like modeling. But I was just like, I heard what he said, and I was like, "Do you mind if I speak on that?" He was like, "No, go ahead." I was like, "I don't know why physically, because I just generally don't know why physically. I don't cry when I get hurt." I'm like, but when I get hurt emotionally, I actually cry a lot. When I'm like hurt mentally, I cry a lot. And I'm like, for me, it helps me get out the negative toxins. I get to engage with what I'm feeling, and I get to actually come down to the depths of what actually is making me sad, what's making me angry. And then I inherently feel better. Like literally, like once you cry, you generally feel better, like whether you're a kid, whether you're an adult. So I just expressed it. I'm like, yeah, when I get hurt mentally, or if I'm hurt emotionally, I'll definitely cry. Um, and he literally the same kid got up and he was like, "That's because real men cry," and then like gave me a high five. And then literally I was like handing out high fives like on some Oprah shit. But for me, it was more about like the moment, right? Like what could I have done? This is my like first week or month, so I could have been like, "Yep, you're right. I don't want to hear shit. You're getting kicked out if you cry. We're not doing this here." So this is like for me, it's like a message to the men who happen to be watching this. Like you never know when somebody's really watching, when they're really seeing how you model and how you do things. So if you're ever going to be a model, like make sure that's for a good purpose, because I didn't know. You never know who's watching you. um and for that young boy to like identify me as somebody he probably looked up to in a moment, and to be like, okay, if he cries and if I deem that he to be cool, I think it'd be cool for me to cry too. So I take that story as more of like a hope that he carried that on as well. And I hope that he tells other people that, because like it literally could have went left. So
Absolutely. And we're getting close to we have the last 4 minutes. And there's something that I have always wanted to do here is do this type of ra- uh, rapid fire rounds where you can say a sentence or a word to someone and get a response from the other person. And I didn't ask anybody to do this, but it's something I always want to do. So I'll do it with you, Jenny. So I'll say some words and you please tell me the first thing that comes to your mind. So the first word that I have for you is liberation,
Freedom to be yourself.
healing,
Um, Overcoming pain and trauma.
queer.
Um, it, excuse my language, fuck you to the gender system.
Love that. Non-judgmental approach.
um, Empathy. Yeah.
And justice.
Um, yeah, liberation for everybody.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. Anything closing that you would like to, something you want to share before we end this awesome conversation that we have today, or you, or Serrano, anything that you want to say in order before we close?
I just want to say thank you for having me. It's been really inspiring to hear all of your work, and especially some of these stories of like men and masculine folk who are, turning things around. It's really inspiring. And I'm glad we're all here trying to work on making the world a better place.
Okay, well, thank you again for joining us on our 46th live kitchen table conversation, and thank you to you, Jeannie, for joining us as a special guest star, a super special guest star. We want to thank also the founding partners like Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota, the Noble Foundation for their support and their partnership. And as a reminder, we are holding this conversation every other Tuesday at 12 p.m. Central Time. We will be taking a short break from our conversation, and we'll resume on Thursday, September 8th. So in 2 weeks, we're not going to be meeting in our next live. But you know that you can, in September 8th at 12 p.m., we'll be back to continue and resume more conversations on Facebook. So don't forget to give like to our page and stay connected with the network. And you can check us out at our previous conversation on our Facebook page on YouTube channel. So thank you again for joining the conversation and take good care. And until the next time, thank you.
Thank you.